question of what Americans should be eating continues to spark debate. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, released the new federal food guidelines with the ideas that have drawn both interest and concern. To help us separate science from policy, we're joined by Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, a physician and expert in metabolic health and nutrition, and former NASCAR and IndyCar driver, Danica Patrick. Welcome, both of you, to Hello Houston.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
You know, Dr. Lyon, I interviewed you on Cold Coffee back in April of last year, 2025, about metabolic health and nutrition. And it seems that there has been a lot of changes since then within this space, or at least it changes from a headline perspective. And looking at these changes, what stands out to you as very well-supported research, and where should listeners and people be cautious?
First of all, these new dietary guideline changes have been the biggest win that I think that we have seen in decades for the health of Americans. And here's why. For the first time ever, we are prioritizing real whole foods and high quality proteins. What is also different about these guidelines is that the old guidelines relied a lot on epidemiology. Mm-hmm. These guidelines rely on many randomized control trials, so it's high quality evidence. The recommendations in these guidelines are backed by science, and that's what is so impactful, especially as we decide what are we going to eat and what are we going to feed our children.
Right, and that's the big one, is feeding our children, I think.
I would guess the confusion comes along in the way it was rolled out with the inverted pyramid, and people got confused. If you actually look at what is being said, it makes really solid sense what you're saying to eat now. I think the message got lost in the graphics and all of that. To help people clearly understand as simply as possible, how should they incorporate these new guidelines into their daily life?
Eat whole foods. High quality protein, and for a number of someone's like, well, how much is that? It's high quality protein at every meal, and this is things like lean beef, chicken, fish, eggs, dairy, and the number, for those of you guys who are interested in the number, it's 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kg.
That's interesting, but because, you're talking about protein, and I feel like something that we're seeing, anybody who opens up their phone is, you can get protein within donuts now. You can get protein shakes. You can get energy with protein. What is good protein to you?
What we're seeing in the landscape, again, you can go to a coffee shop and they say that they've got protein.
Starbucks has protein coffees.
I didn't want to call them out, but it's true. And it's
I'll do it for you. I'll call them out.
It's wonderful that we're beginning to think about it because it's the most important macronutrient. Yeah. Danica has been training forever, and since changing her nutritional plan, she's become fitter and stronger than she's ever been. Where we need to begin to really change the conversation and orient ourselves and our environment is to have high quality protein at least at that first meal. And that could be a whey protein shake. It could be Greek yogurt. It could be eggs. And the difference is the old guidelines prioritized grains. It was 12 servings of grains.
Right.
Now we're down to 2 or 3. It's a lot of common sense, but what becomes so impactful is we were talking about, what do we feed our kids?
Yeah.
What about the military? What about hospitals?
Schools?
Critically important. And that is one reason why it's the biggest win. The guidelines inform what those that receive the federal funding have to comply with.
Mm-hmm. Danica, let me ask you about your relationship with diet and health, because we know you professional athlete, race car driver. We know that there were some health challenges that followed that. And then
That's where Gabrielle came in.
Right. And then you re-looked at your diet, your health. What was the big aha for you that diet was a key component?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I fell into, I don't know how many people fell into the trap in sort of the late teens, like 16, 17, 18 time, where it was like, vegan restaurants and meat and things being, dangerous, and you should eat more of this, and you don't really need that much protein. And like, I went for it. I tried it. And it was the least healthy I ever was. It was the least energy I ever had. It was the least satiated I ever was. And bottom line was I always felt better with animal fat and like eggs and steak and things like that. It always made me feel better. But I was like, oh, well, calories, or I was like, oh, well, that's bad to eat meat, right? Then I felt bad for the animals for a minute, you know? I went ahead and watched a whole bunch of really gruesome videos about slaughtering, and I'm like, I can't do it and be part of the problem.
Right.
But honestly, quite simply, it's either them or me. And that's the way I see it, is I felt like I was dying without it. So yeah, that was part of it. Part of it was just shifting towards, and now if there's any two things I recommend to people, they're like, what do you do? How do you look? Eat your protein. Don't be stupid. Eat your protein and lift weights. I think so many people are afraid of lifting weights, and they think if they want to go get healthy or be fit, they go for a run. Forget it. That's for the birds.
It's interesting that you talk about lifting weights. I've had this conversation actually with Dr. Lyon about this, and my own OBGYN, where she's like, Celeste, there is this misconception about as women age, you don't want to bulk up. You need to start running and cardiovascular work for your heart. Talk to us a little bit about that. And I want you to touch on lifting weights. And I also want you to talk to us a little bit about VO2 max, because I'm hearing a lot about your VO2 max and weights.
First things first, if you pair the new dietary guidelines with resistance training, what we're looking at is a pathway to health because it impacts skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is the largest organ system in the body. It's not just for athletics. Danica and I have been trying to get bulky for the last 20 years.
Trying hard.
I can teach you how to get bigger.
I take double the recommended creatine a day.
It's not going to happen.
For the record, y'all are my height. Just want to put that.
It's never going to happen. And what we have to recognize is the old guidelines were always about what we have to lose. Oh, we have weight to lose. These guidelines are about what we have to eat and how and what we have to gain, which is muscle. Muscle is the focal point for women who are aging, and also these diseases like cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, type 2 diabetes. These are not diseases that begin in fat or obesity. These are diseases of skeletal muscle first. And when we prioritize skeletal muscle, everything else falls into place. And, you know, I have a new playbook coming out, the Forever Strong Playbook, and it actually has how to implement these new dietary guidelines and how to train to support muscle health. It doesn't matter if you are a beginner, intermediate, or someone like Danica who's repping out pull-ups with a 35-pound weight. I'm just getting tired looking at her. But it's not about overcomplicating the message or the system. It's about understanding that once we get the foundation right and we are consistent with a game plan, a tactical game plan forward, that we can really move the needle.
I also like that the idea of this is what I need. How much of our life have we spent looking at all kinds of things like I shouldn't have it, I shouldn't have it, right? You need to be looking at dietary protein. You need to be eating high quality food and going, I need that. My body needs that. It's a mindset shift, and I really believe that's part of the sort of matrix of getting more healthy.
Let me ask, two questions come to mind hearing all of this. First of all, for folks who live a vegetarian diet, is there a way to get quality proteins in there still to still adhere to either vegan or vegetarian diet?
Eat the steak.
Eat the steak is your advice to vegetarians?
The high quality, low quality, they're just terms, and they're biological terms based on the building blocks of proteins, meaning the amino acids. And without making it too complicated, animal-based products are considered high quality. Okay. High quality proteins with nutrient density, things like B12, zinc, selenium. Plant proteins are considered lower quality. They're higher in vitamin C and water-soluble vitamins and fiber. If someone is vegan or vegetarian, could they get the daily amount of protein that they need? Yes, absolutely. However, think about what rides along with those sources of protein. Plant proteins typically have a higher carbohydrate load with them. So for example, quinoa. I don't know if you go to the store and it'll say the protein power bowl and it will have quinoa. It would take 6 cups of quinoa to equal 1 small chicken breast from a protein perspective. It's not impossible to do it. I know many vegetarians. It just takes a little more effort, and you have to become very careful that your micronutrients are also met.
And one other question that I had was when we talk about diet and what we're consuming, a lot of folks have turned to, and I know this will probably be an awkward conversation, Ozempic and Mounjaro and all those things. It changes the amount you want to eat. and the way you should be eating. Is there advice to folks that are on those kind of drugs of how to still have a balanced, healthy diet within that world?
To be clear, also, I don't think it's awkward.
Okay.
We prescribe, I have a medical clinic. It's called Strong Medical. We prescribe GLP-1s, and they're here to stay.
Okay.
They're critical. They're important. We've never had something more effective in the landscape. However, if we are not careful, there was the obesity epidemic in the late 70s, early 80s that we missed. We didn't even think about muscle. We are at risk of trading the obesity epidemic for an epidemic of sarcopenia, which is we've seen low muscle mass strength. We've seen our parents, we've seen our grandparents get smaller. And in order to prevent that, you must get resistance training right, which is, again, for those at home, you don't have to go to the gym. You can start with body weight, move to bands. If you want to go crazy, get a dumbbell program, a kettlebell program, but it's a non-negotiable. It's like brushing your teeth.
But nutritional advice for folks that are on there who suddenly have very less appetite, a lot of things aren't appealing to them. I think a lot of those folks aren't eating healthy anymore because they're just cutting food out altogether. How can you balance that?
I was going to back this in by saying that you have to have that resistance piece with someone who's using Ozempic or some kind of GLP-1. But dietary protein is what we consider muscle sparing and lean mass sparing. That is most critical. And I would say that first meal of the day, whenever you have that, making sure you're hitting between 30 and 50 grams. If you are on a medication that decreases appetite, which these do dramatically, you have to eat protein first. It is the most important, essential macronutrient, and you have to focus on that.
You're listening to Hello Houston. We are speaking with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, a physician and expert in metabolic health and nutrition, and Danica Patrick, former NASCAR and IndyCar driver. We do have a call on the line, and if you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call or text 713-440-8870. Let's go to Chris from Cyprus. Chris, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your question for Dr. Lyon?
Hi. Could you talk a little bit more about the body mass index? One of the things that I don't know if they factor in is muscle mass versus fat, and adjusting, that proportionally with weight. So you could be a certain height, you could be a certain weight, but if it's muscle mass, then, I don't know if there's any way to kind of, differentiate, what's a healthier scale to kind of follow.
Chris, you have just uncovered the way of the future. Now, for those that are listening, BMI is really based on, again, it's the body mass index, and it doesn't differentiate really between body composition. So those with higher muscle mass typically have a higher BMI, which then could put them into an overweight or obese category. We typically don't use BMI. The next best way to identify body composition is really body fat percentage. That would be done with a DEXA, and that shows bone and fat and extrapolates the rest. So lean body mass is all grouped into one section. Interestingly, it doesn't measure skeletal muscle mass directly. Why do I say this? Because it's a glaring obstacle that we have. I don't know the optimal amount of muscle mass that would be important for Danica. I know what the challenges are if her muscle gets too low, but in terms of an optimal muscle mass, which is where we're going to get to, is going to be the way of the future. So BMI is not something that we look at. You could look at body fat percentage, but what if I were to look into a magic looking glass, I would say it's going to be the fat in the muscle that's going to be most relevant as we move forward. It's actually, is your muscle, does it look like a Wagyu steak, or does your muscle look like a filet?
I think for me, part of my training at the gym that I go to is every 3 weeks when we start a new training cycle, we in-body scan. And so, that's not a DEXA, which is harder to get to, I would imagine, because I've actually never had one of those before. But it gives you, once you do it consistently, it really gives you a measure of things. It gives you your body fat, it gives you your muscle, it measures all of that. So it gives you a percentage of those things that you're talking about. And so you can get access to that. So while there might not actually be an exact magic number, right? I mean, everybody is different, but you're probably looking to achieve the highest sort of sort of body composition for yourself that you're happy with. And so if you start in-body scanning even just like once a month while you're doing your training, you're keeping an eye on things. So if you're eating less, are you losing too much muscle? Because you do need calories to come in to be able to build the muscle. So there's that like perfect zone that you're trying to hit where you're losing a little bit of fat but gaining a little bit of muscle if possible. And so something like an in-body scan at your local gym or somewhere could be something that you could do regularly that would help it keep track of it to at least dials it in for you.
I will say, I go to F45, and at our local F45 gym, we do the in-body scan, and that was such a game changer for me because the second that you actually start seeing your percentage of fat versus your percentage of muscle, and whenever you see that you are going up in muscle and you're bringing down the fat, it's interesting for me. I wasn't quite bringing down the fat as quickly as I probably should have been, which really meant that I wasn't zoning in on my nutrition.
But your body fat percentage was going down.
It was. It was going down.
And I want to say one more thing. Regardless of body composition changes, the simple act of engaging in exercise improves the health of skeletal muscle as an organ system.
And again, 713-440-8870. Let's go to the phone lines. Ashish from the medical center is on the line. Ashish, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your comment or question?
Thank you all so much. I really love y'all's show. I'm a nephrologist, a kidney doctor, and I really appreciate your guest perspective. It's interesting. But one thing I just wanted to, as far as when it comes to animal-based proteins, I do see people, especially when it just feels like gyms push a lot of protein nowadays, especially animal protein. And I get patients who come in who have been eating more than 2 grams of a kilo of protein, where they end up having some kidney issues. And then the other fact I think is important for other listeners to remember is that these are great recs for people with normal health, but with people with other health problems, especially in my world, the kidney problems, even 1.2 grams of protein per kilo can be potentially harmful to the kidneys. And animal proteins sometimes are also a little bit more harmful to the kidneys when you have chronic kidney disease as opposed to plant-based protein.
So
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. I would love to jump in here. So if we were to look at the data, the average American eats 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. The average female eats around 70 grams of protein a day, and the average male eats around 90 grams of protein a day. The average intake overall is 1.1 grams per kg, which means 50% of people are below that number. And when we talk about, is protein bad for the kidneys, I have not seen the evidence that that is so, nor have I seen the evidence that that initiates kidney problems. In fact, and there's been multiple meta-analyses regarding this. So I trained as a geriatrician, which means my fellowship was in individuals over the age of 65. And what we saw was that dietary protein intake actually improves glomerular filtration rate. And one more thing, all proteins are made of amino acids. The body doesn't know the difference if it is getting a plant-based protein or if it is getting an animal-based protein. Protein is made of 20 different amino acids. And so the idea that one could say, well, animal protein in particular is bad for the kidneys from a biochemistry aspect it doesn't make any sense. And I think it continues to be a myth. I was actually speaking to a nephrologist. He's a very famous nephrologist named Jason Fung. And he was talking about how in the evidence-based literature and in the nephrology world that protein recommendations, that people haven't even been talking about that since, I don't know, for the last 10 years. And then one other thing, what we do see is that when individuals increase their muscle mass, that GFR and creatinine is not adequate, that you must get an additional marker, something called a cystatin C. And when that's corrected for, we see normal kidney function.
I do want to mention here that we understand each person is different, individual. When we talk in these topics, they're more general than your specific recommendations. Always check with your medical professional before making any changes, but that we're giving you just some opinions and guidelines.
And one more thing that he said, what do you think damages kidneys the most? And it's type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is driven by excess carbohydrates.
And is there, it's a question for you, doctor.
I might have an answer for you.
So to play into that sort of matrix of problems, I've heard that muscle is a good glucose disposal. So the more muscle you have when you have a carbohydrate, it does a better job of processing it. Is that true? And like, would that be an indication that, people need to continue to gain muscle mass as well to help with that pathway?
Yes. If you want better metabolic profile, let's say you go to your doctor and they look at your triglycerides and your glucose and your insulin and it's out of whack. What you're really seeing is a mismatch between muscle health and nutrition. Muscle is the largest site for carbohydrate disposal, glucose disposal, and it's very important for a sink. As you said, it's this metabolic sink. It is the fastest way to improve those metabolic markers by increasing muscle mass.
Danica, I have a question for you. It's kind of an odd question, but after all these
Don't
years...
make it too technical over here. I'm going to have to shift the focus.
Very not technical. It's what keeps you motivated? After all these years, to continue to do this work, to stay as fit as you are, what keeps you motivated?
Yeah. Sort of integrity. It's baked into my personality to care. I don't really do anything halfway. So, getting dressed every day, right? Like if we're talking about eating right and lifting weights and body composition, like it's just nice to wake up and feel good. I also like to accomplish great things, and I like to work. I don't have to, but I like to work. And so the way that you have the best energy and focus for that is to dial those things in. That's why I think that pointing in the direction of kids and the food at school, like we're looking at an epidemic of ADHD and lack of focus and erratic behaviors and depression, and get the food dialed in. Like just like we're able to grow big and strong on fruit roll-ups, but imagine if it was, grilled chicken tenders and broccoli and some, white rice or brown rice, whatever your preference is, something like that. So I think that food with kids plays a big, big role.
And we have gotten quite a few comments on YouTube, and we have some questions, so I want to be sure to get to those as well as a caller. Alex Garza-Foto has a question for you, Dr. Lyon. She says, for women navigating perimenopause or menopause, how should they approach hormone optimization like HR2 to reclaim energy and prevent rapid decline?
It's a great question, and we are definitely seeing the conversation shift towards a female perspective because for so long, women were not discussed in terms of hormones. After the Women's Health Initiative, everyone was kind of afraid of hormones. And the first thing is find a provider that you trust. And the way to do that is to get a recommendation from someone who is going through that and or has seen another physician. I would argue that, again, you have to speak to your provider, but hormones are generally considered safe. They just recently removed the black box warning, and this is going to now increase both the availability from a provider perspective and have less restriction for the patient, that you do have a choice and you do not have to suffer with going through perimenopause and menopause.
And again, you're listening to Hello Houston. We are talking to Dr. Gabrielle Lyon as well as Danica Patrick. If you have a comment or question, you can call 713-440-8870. Let's go to Angela from the Heights who's on the line. Angela, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your comment or question?
Hi, thank you for your amazing programming. I am a lifelong vegetarian, and what I follow is a diet for a small planet. And it shows how through different combinations you can get more amino acids than a steak. But the good news is that it also has a ton of fiber and helps, keeping me healthy at my advanced age. But there's so much information in that book. It came out in the late 70s, and it sort of is, it isn't, but it is the Bible for true vegetarians to ingest enough protein to be healthy per your, what you're sharing, which is amazing.
Angela, thank you for that. Let's find out what the doctor thinks.
So that was A Diet for a Small Planet. That's Francis Borlape's work. It's very interesting, and I think that really shot vegetarianism into the mainstream and the media. And first of all, for the caller on the line, it is amazing that you've been able to stick to a plan that works for your body. And I absolutely commend you for that. As it relates to where we are now in the landscape, amino acids, again, the amino acids in a steak are different than the amount of amino acids in broccoli. Through proper food combination, one can be successful as a vegetarian. However, if someone is not very active, you have to be very careful about the overall carbohydrate intake. And one more thing, we don't just eat proteins. We don't eat just saturated fat. We eat whole foods. And there are nutrients of concern like B12, zinc, iron. And when an individual is not extremely careful, and when they decrease their animal-based products, they decrease their, quote, nutrient density. And that's just something for someone who is listening that is perhaps not as advanced as this caller, that they just have to keep in mind.
What is the relationship between the amino acids and protein itself? Because when we're talking about high-quality protein, I feel like one of the things that I've also learned along the way is about the bioavailability of that exact protein. So does that matter if the amino acids are high and the protein's high, but the protein is not very bioavailable and you only absorb, let's say, half of it?
It does, which means you have to consume more, which is why it's challenging typically for vegetarians unless they're extremely careful.
But
Well, just to follow up on that question, I'm just curious, when we talk about fiber and carbohydrates, people, I think, confuse the two. Yeah.
Yes. So fiber is, for the most part, you're utilizing it to be excreted, whereas carbohydrates, depending on the type, is metabolized fully, right? So not all fibers are digested in the same way.
Okay, so we also have another question. Actually, this one's about F1. I think we're gonna move. We're gonna move on. This one's all for
It's
you,
Oscar
Danica.
season.
Yes.
Gabrielle, I thought this was for Gabrielle.
So
She's a very good driver.
Sean Radigan would like to know.
I got to tell you, it makes me nervous with her in the front
I
seat.
bet. I was saying, who drove here today? No, Sean
She
Radigan
did.
would like to know, could you ask Danica if Formula One will take off in the U.S. now that we have a new American team entering in 2026? Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think that will help from a fan perspective. But I think that the big boom that I believe that we have seen over the last 7 years maybe with Drive to Survive on Netflix was such a big series and such a binge-worthy series for so many people. I think that will be the biggest boom we'll see. I think as far as an American team goes, I think that it will hopefully maintain the momentum because there's an F1 race in Miami, in Austin, as well as in Las Vegas. And so that's a lot. That's, 3 races. And I worked them the last 5 years, and they all maintained a lot of good momentum and energy. And so I think it's about keeping that up. And then that will probably slowly accelerate things. But I think the big boom is from something like the Netflix show was a really big deal. And then having these races for people to come to in the United States is good. But I think it won't. I don't think it will have the same impact, but I do believe it will help.
Are there any up-and-coming female drivers that you have your eye on that you're saying, yeah, this is somebody to watch?
Not really. I think that one of the things that F1 tried to do was have what was like F1 Academy, and then, the W Series, and then F1 Academy is what it became. And, I was always a little more controversial in my perspective on all of that. I really believe that you're going to eventually have to race against everyone anyway. And so if you have the opportunity to race against everyone, guys, girls, everyone, that was your best opportunity to build in confidence and belief within other organizations and levels up. But I do believe that it created some opportunities because, let's face it, there's more jobs in racing than just being the driver. You can be the engineer, you can be a strategist, you can go work for F1 itself and sort of critique the racing and create, like you're the penalty, you're the one that's assessing an on-track example of somebody driving poorly or creating an accident. So there's a lot of jobs that you can have within racing, and I think that it creates that. But I don't think there's any one in particular right now that stands out. But that doesn't mean that they're not on their way and right there. I've always said that I don't think racing is inherently a very female thing. As I've described to my friends many times, the style of driving and how I think, even when I'm driving on the road, they're like, yeah, that's not natural. It's very aggressive and very it's very forceful, and so I don't think it will ever just be equal. And I think that, and I've always said that for every 100 drivers that come through that are men, and you find one that's really good, how long does it take for 100 women to come through? And so I think they've tried to create opportunities, but But I don't think that's the way. I think the best way is that they start young and they keep their nose to the grindstone and create those opportunities for themselves. But I don't think it will ever just be like 50-50. I don't.
A little earlier in the show, we were talking Oscars. F1 is up there. Did you see the film, and what'd you think?
Long pause.
I think that I've watched half of it. I watched half of it the other day, and I watched like an hour and a half. I think it's like 2.5 hours long. It's like it's not race. It's not exactly like it's just not the way it would go. I think that there are people that have seen it that are in racing that think it's good. I personally would just love to see it more like fictitious and just might as well be like I'd rather see Talladega Nights than it's like probably you watch doctors on Doctor's Show and you're like that's not a scalpel.
Whenever you see your industry portrayed in commercials,
it's so hard to.
Yeah.
So I mean I think that it was a really speaking to the last question the caller had about making the sport more popular. I think those are examples of ways that it creates a buzz and an energy and an interest in the sport by creating, by plugging it into a different realm of Hollywood and Brad Pitt, and so there was always a lot of buzz like Brad Pitt's at the track. Oh my gosh, so that was really cool. So I think it does a really good job for that. But it's entertaining for many. It's just when you're tapping into the exact thing that I did, it's like I don't know, that would happen.
It's like too close to home.
Yeah.
But Dr. Lyon, I have to ask you. Obviously being a race car driver, racing demands a lot of focus under pressure and an intense mindset. Do you find that as somebody who works with people in a certain type of arena, that certain personalities do better in a gym than other personalities?
The first chapter in the Forever Strong Playbook is how to think.
Yeah.
One has to close the delta between the perfect plan and the perfect exercise. They have to close their mind frame. One has to understand there is a framework for thinking, and those that have been the most successful, I still see patients, and I can tell you almost right off the bat where a patient is in their career and in their life based on their framework of thinking. And it is accessible to everybody, but it has to be trained. I'll give you an example. Those that are the most successful, believe it or not, are actually very neutral. They don't get too high and they don't get too low. They turn it on and they turn it off. They are very emotionally agile. And those are learned skills. And to simply give you an example of how someone would do that is to add friction, either it's mental friction, physical friction, or say emotional friction purposefully in your day.
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier, about exposure. Essentially, like we were talking about my profession and my career and developing these skill sets. And it's like, you don't just like flip a switch. You don't just, there's no one magic pill. It's a lot of exposure. Yeah. Like it didn't mean that I didn't get nervous doing things. It didn't mean things weren't hard. But like the constant exposure will give you the desensitization to it to be able to step into it and be able to have the focus needed. Because I think that's a lot of times what it gets. You can get so out of your head that you can't focus to do things properly. But yeah, I mean, I think, in my experience too, I've had a lot of friends that don't necessarily always train like me. And there are many kinds of gyms, right? There's a lot of different kind of training to do. But I would always say that it's good to sort of push yourself in every way. It's that friction mentally, physically, emotionally that's going to create the growth. And no great things came from comfort zones. Yeah. I mean, that's been said a million times.
Celeste said that she was going to join us for a workout.
Has she been there?
Danica, no, we're still
Don't go on Fridays.
Sigma Performance.
Skip Fridays.
They've been texting me, and Dr. Lyon, I got to say, I will join you at one point, I promise.
I know
it's
better
warm
than to
in
make
here.
those promises.
Next Wednesday.
Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is a physician and expert in metabolic health and nutrition. Her latest book, The Forever Strong Playbook, a 6-week science-based plan to sharpen your mind, strengthen your body, and get healthy at any age, is out now. And former NASCAR and IndyCar driver Danica Patrick. Thank you both for joining us today.
Never mind all the good recipes in there. I had the breakfast sandwich this morning, and it was delicious.
Amazing. And I want to just end with one thing. Oh, you guys ended.
Well,
but I'll tell you, at the end of the day, we talk about nutrition, we're talking about protein, but what we're really talking about is building stronger, more resilient humans.
That's it. And again, we've run
End
out
of
of
the
time.
week.
End of the week.
Be back
And
here on a chilly
See you
Monday.
for some push-ups later.
Yeah, that's
Drive careful out there, everybody.
Quick, get them out
yes,
of here.
drive careful. That's coming from Danica Patrick. And again, we want to thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.